This is the most powerful medal I have ever seen in my life. I have seen conversions. I have seen physical healings.
If you have a son or a daughter who's anxious, who's nervous, who is away from God the Father, put a blessed miraculous medal on them. Mary will protect them.
And so I keep a bag of miraculous medals in my backpack.
A few months ago, I did a video on the brown scapular. I focused on the historicity of the scapular and of the apparition of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And then I also touched on how Catholics act as if they believe in magic, since they act as if the scapular literally does something for them, instead of the more theologically correct belief that the scapular itself does nothing other than remind you to be virtuous, which is not what Our Lady of Mount Carmel said according to the legend. Anyway, that video came out 4 months ago as of the time of me writing this script, and in those 4 months, I have gotten a few requests to do a similar deep dive on what is probably the second most popular Catholic sacramental that you can wear, the Miraculous Medal. So this video is for Martinus and for the others who left similar notes in the comment sections and over email over the past few months. This is a deep dive into the Catholic views on, perhaps the trad Catholic views on, and the historicity of the Miraculous Medal. Let's begin. Okay, let's start with the summary of what the Miraculous Medal is and how it came to be. I will now relay a summary of events as I heard them as a kid and how most Catholics today probably believe that the events unfolded. You can see what I mean by how most Catholics today believe these events happened like this because little bulletins like this one are available on the internet. This is similar to something that I would have gotten in like the 4th grade or whatever when we covered this apparition in religion class. Anyway, in 1830, Catherine Laboure, a young French novice — a novice is like a seminarian but for nuns instead of for priests — a young French novice told her superior that she experienced a Marian apparition. Actually, it was several apparitions over several months, but during these apparitions, Mary asked St. Catherine that a medal be made. To quote from the official Basilica Shrine of Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal website, framing the apparition was an inscription, "O Mary, conceived without sin, pray for us who have recourse to thee." When Mary spoke to St. Catherine, she said, "Have a medal struck upon this model. Those who wear it will receive great graces, especially if they wear it around the neck. Those who repeat this prayer with devotion will be, in a special manner, under the protection of the Mother of God. Graces will be abundantly bestowed upon those who have confidence." With approval of the Catholic Church, the first medals were made in 1832 and distributed in Paris. Almost immediately, the blessings that Mary promised showered down on those who wore her medal, and soon all of France was clamoring for what the people referred to as the Miraculous Medal. Use of the medal spread from country to country, and at the time of St. Catherine's death in 1876, more than 1 billion medals had been made. Today, the medal is still drawing down from God's blessings for body and soul. St. Catherine was canonized in 1947 by Pope St. Pius XII. Something that the official website does not mention is that, like with other Marian apparitions, Mary prophesied some stuff with scary accuracy, according to the popular story. Let an expert explain that story. That expert will be Father François Bandet, a priest of the Heralds of the Gospel who has a PhD from some pontifical university in Rome. He describes the initial prophecy that Our Lady made to St. Catherine like this.
Our Lady warned St. Catherine about a revolution that was going to occur.
Interesting.
There was going to be a revolution, a terrible revolution against the church, against the good, and against the king. And so St. Catherine, after the apparition, she told her confessor, Le Père Aladin was his name, the Père Aladin, who was very skeptical.
Remember that name, Father Aladel, La Père Aladel. In some ways, this video is actually more about the tragic life of Father Aladel than it is about St. Catherine Laboure. I'll explain more later, but for now, let Father Bandet finish his story.
A few weeks later, a revolution did take place. And many churches were burnt. Priests, the bishops were imprisoned. Some were killed. Nuns. It was terrible. And the king,
Charles X,
right? He was deposed. When that happened, Le Père Aladel, well, he kind of remembered what the nun had said.
Yeah.
And then he started to question himself and question the nun. Oh, there might be something here.
You may remember that the Basilica website said that the medal was made in 1832, but we just learned that the apparitions took place in 1830. Why the 2-year delay? Well, there was Father Aladel's initial skepticism, and after that, there was a cholera outbreak in Paris. So between the initial skepticism and then the cholera outbreak, there was a 2-year gap in getting the medal made. But as soon as they were distributed, people started reporting tons of miracles thanks to the medal. Mostly these miracles took the form of miraculous conversions. I heard old wives' tales growing up about how, like, a wife would be upset that her husband had fallen away from the faith, so she would sneak a miraculous medal under his pillow, and he would sleep with the miraculous medal under his pillow for 1 week or something, and then suddenly after a week, with no other explanation, the husband just has a strong desire to revert to being a pious, devout Catholic. I would hear old wives' tales like that regularly. For a full description of the story of Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal, I suggest watching that full podcast from the Heralds of the Gospel. But now that we are at least acquainted with the general story, let's dive into some discrepancies. The first thing that I should note is that the actual historical record is not at all as clear as the sanitized story would make it seem. To begin, I should mention that St. Catherine Laboure was not really involved in the official story right away. If you grew up like me, you may have heard that fact, and you may have heard that the reason for the fact that St. Catherine Laboure's name wasn't mentioned for quite a while after the creation of the medal was that she was very humble and she didn't want her name to be out there. Let's review a timeline of events. And to do this, I will be reading from an article called Pierre, Coste, and Catherine Laboure, The Conflict of Historical Criticism and Popular Devotion, written by Father Stafford Poole, published in 1999 in the Vincentian Heritage Journal, Volume 20, Issue 2, Article 3. Here is what we have records for. In 1832, a priest by the name of Father Jean-Marie Aladel approached his bishop, asking the bishop's permission to have a medal made. This is the medal that later came to be called the Miraculous Medal. There is no record of Father Aladel telling his bishop about any kind of apparition, or that the idea was relayed to Father Aladel by a novice. The only documentation that we have is that the bishop's official response is that the newly proposed medal, quote, offered nothing in opposition to the law of the church. Rather, it was very much in agreement with the piety of the faithful towards the very Holy Virgin, and thus it could only contribute to her being honored. It seems odd to me that the bishop did not want to investigate the apparition. It is almost as if the bishop was not told that there was an apparition associated with this medal. More on that in a little bit. Anyway, the medal was made, only about 10 of them at first, by a local jeweler. It's not for another year that we hear anything at all about the apparitions. In 1833, a French priest, a friend of Father Aladel, Father Lambolet, wrote a letter about 2 different apparitions to a person, does not specify gender. Father Lambolet also doesn't seem to know too much about the apparitions himself, because the details that he does provide in the letter are vague, and where he does get specific, he often gets details that are inconsistent with what comes to light later. That's interesting. Father Aladel and Father Laboure lived in the same house for several years, including the time at which Father Laboure wrote this letter. However, Father Laboure never cites his source for where he learned about these apparitions, so we can't know that it was Father Aladel, but it does seem likely to me. This then was the first account of the origin of the Miraculous Medal. Some of the data, especially the date given for the vision of the medal, are not in agreement with what became known later on. Again, this may have been due to the lack of direct personal knowledge on Father Lamboule's part, though at the time of writing, he lived in the same house as Father Aladel. The second record of the apparition comes from a year later, in 1834, in which a professor at the Parisian seminary, who was another friend of Father Aladel, published a letter that Father Aladel had sent him. This letter is dated 17th of March, 1834, and it recounts the story of 3 apparitions, not 2 that Father Laboure wrote about the year prior. And it was this third apparition that Father Aladel said finally compelled him to ask the bishop for permission to have the medal made. This letter still did not reveal the name of the seer, though. This professor friend of Father Aladel published his own addendum to the letter a few months after the initial publication, though, in which he referred to the seer as Sister N, who was a novice at a convent in Paris. Starting to get a few details. It wasn't until 1834 that we get Father Aladel himself speaking on the matter, when Father Aladel published Notice Historique. In Notice Historique, Father Aladel mostly relays the same information that was in the letter that his professor friend had published from him a year prior, but there were some modifications. For one thing, Father Aladel's 1834 letter, he said that the main apparition, the one in which Our Lady asked for the medal to be made, occurred towards the end of the year 1830. In the 1834 letter, though, Father Aladel gets more specific. He says that the apparition occurred, quote, during the course of the month of September, 1830. Remember that month, September, 1830. Additionally, in this account, the vision is that of a painting. Father Aladel calls the unnamed seer's vision that of a tableau. The seer saw a still image of Our Lady, and she heard a voice internally that said, get a medal made of the image that you see. Also remember that it's been 4 years since the apparitions took place, apparently, and St. Catherine Laboure's name has not been brought up at all yet. Fast forward another 2 years. In early 1836, 5.5 years after the apparitions, Father Aladel finally sends a letter to his archbishop. The archbishop immediately opens a canonical inquiry into the matter and assigns a vicar general to the case. This, to me, solidifies the idea that Father Aladel did not mention any kind of Marian apparition when he asked for the medal to be made. Anyway, this vicar general conducts interviews with as many people as he can, including Father Aladel, of course, but notably, the vicar general does not get to interview the seer. And why does the vicar general not interview the still unnamed seer? Because, according to Father Aladel, quote, the sister recalls almost no circumstances of the vision, and that as a result, every attempt to obtain information would be completely useless. This statement was recorded on the 16th of February, 1835. According to Father Aladel, within just 5.5 years, the still unnamed seer had completely lost all memory of the apparition and was now, quote, useless to any kind of canonical inquiry. The archbishop never gave a decision or judgment on the visions of the medal. Archbishop Kellen never issued a verdict, and nothing came of this inquiry. It's not until 1841 that we officially learn the identity of the seer of the apparition of Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal. On the 15th of August, 1841, later to be Sister Catherine Laboure finally breaks her silence. She writes a letter in which she identifies herself as the seer. She says that she saw Our Lady that night holding a globe and standing on a different globe. Keep that in mind. Our Lady is doing something with her arms. She is holding a globe, and she's holding it around stomach height. This is according to St. Catherine's 1841 letter. St. Catherine followed up that letter with a second letter shortly thereafter, where she specifies a date of that fateful apparition in which she was asked by Our Lady to get that medal made. That date was the 27th of November, 1830. Do you remember Father Aladel's Notice Historique? That claimed that the apparitions happened in September, not November. Sister Catherine Laboure was making this claim in 1841, 11 years after the apparitions took place. Meanwhile, Father Aladel was making his claim only 4 years after the apparitions took place. However, Father Aladel wasn't the eyewitness Sister Catherine was. So the more contemporaneous account, Father Aladel's Notice Historique, is better because it's more contemporaneous, but the eyewitness account, Sister Catherine, is more reliable because it's an eyewitness account. So I'm not sure how anybody is supposed to figure out when this apparition took place, whether it was September or November, but whatever, I guess. What is weirder too is that Father Aladel continued to update his Notice Historique. He was issuing new editions of Notice Historique over the years. And I believe he was on about the 8th edition of Notice Historique at the time that Sister Catherine's letter came out, updating the date from September to November. And Father Aladel never updated the date in Notice Historique. He died claiming that the main apparition took place in September. It should be noted through some miracle that Sister Catherine Laboure's amnesia seems to have been cured. And if you're wondering what date between the two won, it's the November date that Catherine herself stated in 1841. St. Catherine Laboure's feast day is November 28th, which is when the vision would have ended if it started on the 27th and then went into the 28th. All right, fast forward now to 1856. St. Catherine has a new confessor, Father Jules Chinchon, and he was asking her to give him a written account of the events from 1830. So St. Catherine obliged, and things got even weirder. St. Catherine admits in this letter from 1856 to eating a relic of St. Vincent. Now, don't worry, it was only a second-degree relic. You know, Sister Catherine was not a cannibal. But she ate half of a relic. She took a piece of St. Vincent's clothes, tore a chunk off, and ate it because she thought that would induce visions of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Anyway, the actual account of the apparition changed as well. It became grander than it already was. So now in 1856, for the first time, we learned that Sister Catherine was woken up in the middle of the night by a small boy dressed in white who led her to the chapel where Our Lady was waiting for her. This angel child, was never part of the story prior to 1856. There were other changes too. Like, this is very clearly not the vision of a painting, but rather she's having a conversation with Our Lady. So it's just very different. And it appears as if Father Aladel was getting exasperated by the variations in the words full of inconsistencies of Sister Catherine. Father Aladel had hesitated in 1830. The increasingly numerous wonders attributed to the medal inclined him towards the belief in the visions, but there are strong reasons for suspecting that the contradictions and the false prophecies of the visionary caused him to fall back on his original hesitations. The edition of Notice Historique that Father Aladel envisioned for 1856 never appeared, although there was great demand for a new one. Why? After Father Aladel's death in 1856, his successor hoped to find a file on the visionary and her visions among his papers. He was disappointed. Father Aladel's notes had been almost entirely destroyed. Father Aladel never retracted what he wrote in Notice Historique. But could he have done so without scandal? And without hurting the spread of the medal, an excellent devotion in itself, independently of the circumstances that could have instigated it? We'll return to the tragedy of Father Aladel towards the end of this story. But for now, let's return to two words in particular on page 276. False prophecy. What false prophecy? So far, the only prophecy that we've talked about was the prophecy about the political turmoil, the one that came true, right? Well, that one sure did come true, and there are actually tons of other prophecies attributed to Sister Catherine's special connection to Mary that also came true. Only problem is that they were all made after the fact. Let me quote from pages 278 and 279 of Father Poole's article. All of these so-called prophecies were fulfilled, except one. Charles X was overthrown by the Revolution of July 1830. Father Aladel became the director of the Daughters of Charity in 1846 and founded a congregation of the Children of Mary. Father Etienne, named Superior General in 1843, reformed the three communities, those of Madame Seton, in part in the United States, the Leopoldines of Bronis at Graz in Austria, and the Verviers in Belgium were united to the Daughters of Charity. Great evils came through the Revolution of 1830, that of 1848, the defeat of 1871, and the Commune that followed. Father Dubois, the Archbishop of Paris, was assassinated. If Sister Catherine had written these prophecies in 1830, the year of the visions, or even in 1856, when she related the nocturnal vision, we would have no choice but to bow down and recognize her prophetic spirit. Unfortunately, the document that relates them is from 1876, and by then, all of these events had been accomplished. And there's one other story that I need to relate from Father Poole's article because it's just too bizarre not to share. This comes from pages 276 to 277 in a section called The Hidden Treasure. I will leave both pages up on the screen now, but I will summarize this section as follows. Sister Catherine told her Mother Superior that Our Lady had told her that the sisters should start digging in the garden of the convent. They would then find, according to Catherine, a treasure, the means by which they would be able to build not just a small chapel to Our Lady, but a whole church. This was apparently something that Sister Catherine repeated over the years because 3 separate Mother Superiors all attempted to find this treasure hidden in the garden. Nothing was ever found. Now, I will note that on page 297, Father Poole does caution this story. He says, the story of the hidden treasure, as strange as it is, must be approached with caution, since the only source for it is a letter that was cited by Coste, but which is unknown today. But if we're going to accept that Papias really said the things that we attribute to him today, it seems that we should also accept this story from Father Coste, but that's a whole other topic. By the time that I had gotten this far in my research for the Miraculous Medal, I started thinking, something seems really off about Sister Catherine Laboure. I mean, in that section that we just went over about the hidden treasure, Father Poole ends that section with the statement that some of her sisters thought that Sister Catherine's, quote, head was not on straight, and he includes that quote in French as well. And let's not forget that Sister Catherine admitted to eating a relic because she thought that would induce visions of Our Lady, as if relics were some kind of hallucinogenic drug. And her messaging was contradictory at best. Do you remember me talking about St. Catherine's 1841 letter in which she said that the apparition was of Mary holding a globe rather than standing on a globe? Well, let's take a closer look at what is on the Miraculous Medal, what has always been on the Miraculous Medal. What is Mary doing with her arms? She is not holding a globe, I can tell you that much. Her arms are outstretched and she's radiating some kind of light beam from her hands. One of Catherine's sister nuns wrote a letter as part of Catherine's beatification process, and she relayed a conversation that she had with Sister Catherine. She said that, quote, Sister Catherine confided her secret to me. She repeated to me that the Holy Virgin appeared to her, holding a globe in her hands at the level of her stomach. I protested, saying, there has never been a question of the globe. If we speak of this, they are going to say that you have lost your head. It would not be the first time that they have considered me mad, she answered, but I will say until my last breath, the Holy Virgin appeared to me holding a globe of the world in her hands. I replied, you would prejudice the medal by talking about a globe? No, no, sister, let nothing touch the metal, but let a statue be made with the globe, and an altar erected at the place where the Holy Virgin appeared. Sure enough, that statue was erected. An image of that statue is included on page 280 of Pierre, Coste, and Catherine Laboure, The Conflict of Historical Criticism and Popular Devotion. That statue depicts Mary holding a globe and standing on a globe, like St. Catherine Laboure insisted. But take a look at that vertical text. It says that Catherine claimed this later in life. Page 284 states that when the medal was first struck in 1832, Sister Catherine made no objection to the altered design. In later life, she didn't even want the medal changed, only that a statue of the original design be made. So this whole thing is just weird and inconsistent. But people, by and large, seem to be mostly unaware of this stuff. Personally, the only thing that I knew out of everything that I've covered so far prior to my starting the script was the stuff about St. Catherine Laboure later in life saying that the medal got the image wrong. But the rest of it was new to me. I wonder how people would act concerning the Miraculous Medal if they knew all of this. We will likely never know, not unless this information somehow becomes widely disseminated in Catholic culture. But we do know how Catholics act about the Miraculous Medal while not knowing this information, and they treat it like it's magic. I started this video with clips from a Catholic mom's life, Gabby After Hours, and Dr. Taylor Marshall. And notably, I also played a clip from the Heralds of the Gospel podcast. So I would be remiss if I did not start off this section about how many Catholics treat the Miraculous Medal as if it's magic by stating that the Heralds of the Gospel did cover this exact topic in their podcast. They say that while some people do believe that the Miraculous Medal is an amulet, that means that for some Catholics, people avoid the Miraculous Medal altogether, while some people use and abuse it, thinking that it is magic.
People have this wrong idea about the medal. They consider that the medal to be an amulet. So some people don't use a Miraculous Medal because they think it's an amulet. And others, they do use it, and they use it as they would use an amulet. So, but then it's not the truth. Neither case is true.
And they get into the differences between amulets and sacramentals too. They do so here.
So what's the difference between a Catholic devotion, like a Miraculous Medal, or a scapular, etc., and what is an amulet?
Yes. So an amulet is something that somebody, it's superstition, right?
Yeah.
And so it's where somebody believes that a certain object will have spiritual divine powers. You see, that's an amulet.
Father Bandet goes on for a little bit, but I will now cut to where he explains what a sacramental is and how it is different from an amulet.
But a sacramental, all right, like a Miraculous Medal, so they are invitations for us to remind ourselves of the presence of God, of the love of God, and the presence of the saints, and in the case of the Miraculous Medal, Our Lady.
And I do think that this alone kind of proves my point, at least in part, right? Some people do treat the Miraculous Medal as if it's an amulet. The same goes for the scapular and virtually all other sacramentals. But here's the thing. The Heralds of the Gospel go on to describe people using the Miraculous Medal as if it is magic, and they have nothing but praise for people who do so. They have nothing but praise for people clearly treating the Miraculous Medal like it's an amulet. Listen to this section.
You can get those in the gift shops, very small Miraculous Medals, and they go and they sew them in their children's shirts, T-shirts, their pockets, and the child doesn't even know. The child does not even know, but he's wearing a Miraculous Medal.
That only a mother's love can do this. I mean, yeah. Yeah.
And I know many, many children who are saved because of that, their mother's love, because of that motherly attention. So this might be something also that some of our mothers here who are accompanying us, or future mothers, all right, might want to keep in mind, all right?
Is this really just some kind of like cute little trick for mothers who want to min-max their children's grace levels to keep in mind? Should they really keep this in mind? Or is this treating the Miraculous Medal like an amulet? And guess what? Just take a trip into the comment section of any video about the Miraculous Medal, and you will see Catholics lovingly talk about all the different ways that they use the Miraculous Medal as if it was a magic amulet. Under this very video, the top comment is about how some Catholic roofer leaves miraculous medals in people's roofs when he's working on the roof. And the second highest comment is just praising that guy for doing so. I'm sorry, but if you're leaving this medal in somebody else's roof without the owner of the house knowing, how is that an invitation to remind yourself of the presence of God? That is how Father Bandet describes a sacramental, as a reminder. But if the medal is lodged in your roof, unbeknownst to you, then it sounds more like the person who's doing the lodging of the medal in your roof is treating the miraculous medal as an object that has special protective powers that will manifest themselves around you. That's how they described an amulet, not a sacramental. Father Mark Goring's channel also has a video about the miraculous medal. He's not the person speaking here in this video. That would be Deacon Isaac Longsworth. But the top comment under this video is about the commenter's friend who was hit by a car shortly after she started wearing the miraculous medal, but she was somehow unharmed. Is the commenter suggesting that the miraculous medal is an object that has special protective powers that will manifest themselves around you? Or is she treating it like a reminder that we can use to remind ourselves of the presence of God or the love of God or the presence of the saints? I will let you be the judge. And I literally just go to any YouTube comment section under a video about the miraculous medal, and you will see people talking about the miraculous medal as if it was an amulet. And I can already hear the Catholics. Kevin, most Catholics are poorly catechized. The whole past section is a waste of time. You can't blame the amuletization of the miraculous medal on anything other than poor catechesis. And sure, most Catholics are probably poorly catechized. I think that means that there should be far more agnostics out there than there really are, but I'm not going to go there today. Where I am about to go, though, is I want to prove to you that this section is not a waste of time. And to do that, we're going to go back to Father Aladel. I called the life of Father Aladel a tragedy earlier, and I said that I would return to him at the end of this video. So here we are. Thanks for sticking with me. I know this has been a long one. I think that Father Aladel was a man slowly being torn in two over the course of 3 decades. From the time that Father Aladel published the first edition of his Notice Historique on the 20th of August, 1834, until his death on the 24th of April, 1865, Father Aladel seemed to be trying to keep one foot planted firmly in reality while the other foot was trying to reach up to heaven. He was initially skeptical about the whole thing, but he seemed to become more open to the possibility that these apparitions were real when he saw all the good that the miraculous medal was accomplishing. But then he grew even more skeptical about the whole thing as Sister Catherine Laboure kept changing her story, kept making false or post-dated predictions, admitting to eating relics and the like. Father Aladel's true role in the history of the miraculous medal can only be conjectured. As Father Coste hints, he may well have found himself caught up in the onrush of events over which he had no control, and from which he could not extricate himself without scandal. I think that Father Aladel saw how people treated the miraculous medal. I think that he saw that it gave people hope. It gave them hope that a loved one might recover from an illness or that a rebellious son or daughter might return to the faith one day. And I don't think that Father Aladel had the heart to dash the hopes of the poor Parisians who took such solace in the miraculous medal. But then things got away from him. I mean, what could Father Aladel even have done by the 1860s? I mean, if he spoke out then, after there had been 1 billion miraculous medals created, I assume that most people would have been super skeptical of him speaking out. Why didn't he speak out 30 years prior? How could he explain that he thought that this was a harmless, pious fraud, but that things got out of hand? I don't think that he could have said so. So he simply stopped updating his Notice Historique. And he either destroyed her own notes or he had somebody else destroy his notes, likely in an attempt to avoid scandal. Father Poole ends his article with much the same reflection that I am making about Father Aladel, but his reflections are about Father Coste, the French priest who opposed the canonization of St. Catherine Laboure during her canonization process in the 1930s. Father Coste was a renowned French historian at that time. And on page 297, Father Poole writes that, quite clearly, Father Pierre Coste's analysis of the visions of St. Catherine Laboure and all their attendant circumstances led him to reject their historical reality. Though he could not bring himself to reject the medal entirely, calling it an excellent devotion in itself, he put no credence in the events from which it took its origins, nor did he believe in the miracles attributed to it. He then concludes his essay 2 pages later on the following note. Father Coste failed in his attempt to prevent Catherine's beatification. Yet his critique, for the most part, was balanced, thoughtful, and not at all incendiary. The times in which he lived were not receptive to revisionism or scientific criticism of popular devotion. In our own times, in which such critical analyses are less threatening, we can perhaps take a more measured view of the entire question, even to the point of accepting the possibility that the objective reality of Catherine Laboure's visions is open to question. I think that the same can be said for Father Aladel. It seems totally fair to me to say that Father Aladel lived in a time that was not receptive to revisionism or the scientific criticism of popular devotion. Even if he did try to put out the fire after it had spread, I doubt he would have had much success. So I do not write this video essay blaming Father Aladel for inaction here. If I were in his shoes, I would probably have done the same thing. But I'm not in Father Aladel's shoes. I'm writing this script in April of 2024, a full 25 years after Father Poole published his journal article that spurred me to write this script in the first place, and nearly 200 years after the events that took place in either September or November of 1830. Such critical analyses are indeed viewed less threateningly today than they were in 1999, and 1999 was a vast improvement to Father Coste's day in the 1930s, and that was a massive improvement to the 1830s. So, given the privileged position that I find myself in, and that you all watching this video find yourself in, I think that we ought to admit that the Miraculous Medal is clearly a pious fraud. Catherine Laboure seems like a well-intentioned, but not completely mentally well, nun who had her name attached to a medal which spread like wildfire and got out of hand. And seemingly nobody has spoken out against the Miraculous Medal yet, not on Catholic YouTube. The only people who have spoken out about it are people like Father Coste and Father Poole, both of whom are dead now. Father Poole himself passed away, I believe, just a few years ago. But we today, we don't have to be even as brave as Father Poole, much less as brave as Father Coste, who is nothing less than a BAMF for making such a ruckus back in the 1930s about all of this. All that we have to do today is admit that the evidence isn't compelling for the Miraculous Medal's divine origins. I think that the Catholic Church would gain much from a little additional skepticism. Thanks, everybody.